We are in week 6 of the Torah portion and going through Genesis 25 to 28, starting at verse 19, with the lineage of Isaac continuing through his wife Rebekah and his twins. The first set of twins are born here in Genesis 25. So Isaac is 40 when he marries Rebekah, who also goes through barrenness, not quite as long as Sarai. She's barren for about 20 years. And then she does something a little different here and asks Isaac to plead with the Lord on her behalf. Or Isaac does that anyways. He goes to the Lord to ask to heal her barrenness. So the Lord not only heals her, but gives her 2 children in abundance, 2 boys. And then she goes to the Lord herself to complain and say, "Why me?" Because she has finally experienced the pregnancy that she has wished for, that she has asked for. But now that she is experiencing them fighting in her womb, she is experiencing it at a level that is extremely painful. So she goes to inquire of the Lord rather than trying to figure out things for herself. Let's hope that they had learned from the mistakes of Abraham and Sarah at that point, even though they end up repeating some of those same mistakes here in the following chapter. So the Hebrew version of the prophecy that is given in Genesis 25, verse 23, says, 2 nations in your womb, 2 people from your loins shall issue. People over people shall prevail. The elder, comma, the younger's slave. So the way that this is translated is very ambiguous, because it could mean, which is probably what most of your translations say, that the elder shall serve the younger. Or it could mean the elder, comma, the younger shall serve. The original Septuagint translated it as the elder shall serve the younger, in retrospect of this particular story, believing that Jacob was the one to have the birthright. However, when we go back to the original Hebrew, after the instance and the example that we have in Christ, he is called in 1 Corinthians 15 the last Adam, meaning that the first Adam would be the older, the last Adam would be Jesus the younger, even though he existed in the beginning, from the beginning. And he showed us, as Isaiah 53 predicts, what the suffering servant is. So looking back at this in a Christological way, it could mean one way or the other. And this is what week 6 points to. Day 6 for is that beast versus man nature. If the beast is the firstborn and mankind is the second, which one are you going to serve? Are you going to serve your beast or flesh nature, or are you going to serve the one made in God's image? The other ironic thing that I find here is that these boys were twins. So if you believe, like I do, that a life is made at the moment of conception, like it says in Psalm 139 that in Jeremiah, that the Lord forms us in the womb, then, and with scientific belief that we have now of the way that twins can come from either the same egg or two different eggs, but they would be dropped at the same time. Either way, Jacob and Esau are the same age. There really is no older and younger. So Rebekah and Isaac have a different idea, a differing idea that we see throughout these chapters of what that prophecy is to mean. It is very apparent that they believe the prophecy is to mean one is going to serve the other. And they are seeing that the one being served is the one that will be greater, or that will be a leader of some kind, that shows more success for someone to be served than to be the server. Isaac chooses Esau because, as we see through these next few chapters, he is a man of his senses. He likes to indulge in touch and taste and smell. And Rebekah chooses Jacob because she could get him to do what she needed. He would stay in the home with her, and she had a helper, and she had company. So they both favor the other, and they both have an idea, their own interpretation of what this prophecy is to give them. Esau is born red and hairy. That has a connection, as does day 6, with blood and the beast-like nature, just as there is a connection with the fact that Jacob covers himself with the hair of goats in order to feel to his father like Esau feels. So the fact that he is hairy like a goat is going to come into play later, especially when we read in Leviticus about sacrifices. So note that down somewhere, because we'll come back to this. In Genesis 25, at the moment of their altercation, Esau acts kind of like a beast in feeling that he is famished and that a stew is more important. Him eating at that moment, that immediate self-gratification, is more important than the birthright. Now, a birthright includes a double portion of the family inheritance from any other brothers or sisters, and the honor of one day becoming the family leader. The blessing that Isaac is going to do would come alongside that birthright, because the person that is going to inherit the most wants to be blessed as a leader so that he would steward that inheritance well, and so that their family's legacy could continue to be built, rather than somebody who's just going to spend it all or not handle it well, and then the legacy ends with them. So the special blessing was reserved for the one that would receive the birthright, so that it would go for the good of the entire family's legacy to continue. Esau gives that all up when he sells his birthright to Jacob. So this bartering here may look quite unfair, but again, I say they're twins. So here you have a picture of a family of fours, contention, constant contention in the household. The boys are probably somewhere near 30 to 40 years old, because soon after this, it says that that Esau gets married at 40. So it was probably shortly before they both got married, around, we're going to guess 30, the time maybe that Isaac had been at the altar with his father. This is a lot of pattern and repetition that is going on here. So it's just a complete guess at what age that they were at this point, but their father was further along in age, so they were certainly nearing that point as well of developing their own families and moving from their father's house. So this had probably been a long time tension that was not often enough communicated between them, but rather something that was assumed who would get it, or had maybe been argued about who would have it. And likely Isaac had said, Esau's getting the birthright, that's enough. And that's where Jacob and Rebekah felt the need to find their own way for Jacob to receive it. So the stew that he was cooking, the red stew, is something that would have been made near Passover time. Jacob was probably not necessarily calculating cooking this stew to purposefully manipulate his brother, but it is possible he was definitely a man of tactful calculations. So it's certainly possible that he knew after a day of hunting, Esau was one to come home famished and, looking for anything that he could eat. So was it something that he had premeditated? Possibly. In verse 32, Esau actually uses the same phrase that his mother did in Genesis 25:23, when she said, "Why me?" to the Lord. He says, "Lama zeli," why do I need? Why me? Why do I need a birthright? So he sells his birthright to Jacob for the stew without another thought and moves on. And then, we come later on to this chapter of him begging his father to have the birthright back without realizing or maybe remembering what he had done. Maybe he didn't take it seriously. We don't know, but it's quite ironic when you compare these two chapters that are broken up by this sister-wife and hostility story of the wells as well. Those kind of break up the birthright issue. And the reason for that, remember, not everything in the Bible is chronological. It's more thematic, because a lot of these things are written down long after the fact. This is like a historian that is writing down the things that God found important and necessary to write down, with only the details that are important and necessary for us to have to be able to learn from. So the reason that these two chapters, 25 and 27, have this instance between them is probably to show the length of time between the two events, that they weren't things that happened back to back. So there is the possibility that there was some 10, 20 years between Esau selling his birthright to Jacob and he had actually forgotten about it. And that's why he was so taken aback when the time came that Jacob actually received that birthright. So in 26, we see the famine and Isaac repeating the sister-wife act from his dad. in efforts to keep the men from taking or doing something sexually to his wife. These are one of the few active characteristics that we see of Isaac. And this is where we see him have kind of that beast nature as well, where he indulges, and he actually gets caught from indulging in touching his wife. He indulges with her in touching, and he probably favors the son that is able to bring him food when he's hungry, and he indulges in the smell that overtakes him when he blesses Jacob instead of Esau, even after hearing Jacob's voice. He allows certain senses to overcome him and go against his better judgment in these cases. And this was one of the first ones here that he does this in. This is a different location and a different people, not the same Abimelech that Abraham had been with Sarah at many, many years earlier in Egypt. That was a question we talked about Saturday, so I want to make sure I said that this time. This is not the same Abimelech king. This is a different king of the Philistines at a different time. Remember, that would have been maybe 100 years between them. Isaac is 60 now. He wasn't even born at that time when Sarah and Abraham went through this. And they are not... Sarah was in a much more dangerous situation, being taken into the king's harem. Here, Rebekah is not taken into the king's harem. They are just saying that it is more of a problem with the men in the town. And this kind of points back to Sodom and Gomorrah in saying, "What is this you have done to us?" Abimelech says, "One of the people might have well lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us for it," because Isaac didn't say that she was his wife, but apparently men had a habit of taking foreigners and doing what they wanted sexually with them and then mistreating them in that way. So that would have been Isaac's guilt for not stating that this is my wife. So obviously, again, it shows some irony here and some disorder and chaos in the hospitality factor of this nation. Anyway, Abimelech commands the people a protection over Isaac, but then not much later sends Isaac away in envy of his wealth. And you have the Philistine people that are blocking up his wells as to say, well, if we can't have the kind of wealth and water that you're gaining, then nobody can have it. The first well is called Esek, which means contention. The second well, Sitnah, means accusation or hostility. And the third well, Rehoboth, means open spaces. These three wells are a symbolic teaching of the three scenes that we see Isaac's two sons go through. So they have their scene of contention in the womb and in the birthright selling, the birthright auction. And then there is accusation or hostility in this next scene when one finally does receive that blessing from his father and makes that birthright final. And then we're going to see a picture of peace in the next few readings here in a couple weeks that has to do with the brothers learning to enjoy wealth when they are willing to serve each other and allow there to be enough open space that the two of them can be blessed, rather than having to compete, rather than having to be the one that is served. And then Isaac moves to Beersheba, which means 7 oaths. And that is going to come in later with our readings too, as it came in earlier when that was named in Genesis 21. In Genesis 27, as I said, this prophecy had probably been a thing of contention among this household for quite some time. And the real shame in it is that there is not enough communication about that between the husband and the wife. They did not go to inquire of the Lord, what exactly did you mean by that? That we know of. And instead, we see a lot of them going back and forth with their children. Isaac inquires of Esau out of the earshot, or so he thinks, of Rebekah. And then Rebekah goes to Jacob instead of the two of them having a conversation about what they wanted to happen here. There are 7 scenes. The first between Isaac and Esau, then Rebekah and Jacob. Then Jacob goes to Isaac. Then Esau goes to Isaac. And then you see Rebekah warning Jacob to leave before his brother kills him. And then finally, Rebekah and Isaac talk, but only about Esau's wives and how miserable they make her, and that she doesn't want Jacob to marry Hittite wives, so they send him away. So it still is not a good communication between husband and wife. It's just her trying to find a way for her children not to kill each other, because that's what she's afraid is going to happen, like they struggled in the womb with each other. That's her worst fear, is that she's not going to lose just one, but both her sons. And she does end up losing Jacob, as this will be the last time that she sees him at the end of Genesis 27. In the meeting between Jacob and Isaac, his hearing does not fool him. He hears Jacob's voice, and he knows that it doesn't sound like Esau. Neither can Jacob have any control to make it sound that way. So here is where he's really helpless. However, he fools his father by the touch with wearing the goat fur, and taste and smell with the stew being cooked the way that Isaac liked it. So Isaac's indulgence in those things make him forget or ignore the question that he had about it really being Esau. And so he gives the full blessing without holding back to Jacob, and without considering the fact that maybe they could work together. Which leaves Esau to beg for a blessing, and Isaac to tell him there wasn't much left. In verse 23, when it says he did not recognize Jacob because his hands were hairy like Esau's, this is a crucial Hebrew verb that is returned in the story of Jacob when he is deceived by his sons. And it will also play also with goat's blood in the story of Jacob and Joseph. And it will also play in the story of Judah and Tamar, when Judah is sending Tamar goats to pay her. And then of Joseph and his brothers, when they do not recognize Joseph, who was in command during the famine. So this recognition is key, not only through these stories of Genesis, but to the teaching in John 10, when Jesus says, "My sheep hear my voice, and they know it." So hearing and recognition will go hand in hand. In Genesis 27:33, Isaac was seized with a very great trembling. And he said, "Who is it then who caught game and brought it to me? And I ate everything before you came and blessed him. Now blessed he stays." So Isaac was trembling because he had a fear and reverence of the Lord in that moment, whether he thought that the Lord gave us this prophecy and this is actually, it was Jacob that the Lord wanted me to pray over because that's who I ended up praying over, or whether he had thought that he had tried to go against the Lord by choosing Esau. Either way, he was trembling in a way that made him realize, blessed he stays because I cannot go back on my word to the Lord, as he may have been trying to do through making these plans in the first place. There is something that came over him that made it very clear to Isaac that you are not in control here. And so he was not willing to go back on the blessing that he had already given to Jacob. And that is why, even with Esau's bitter cry, Isaac says, "I don't have much left to tell you now." The ironic thing is that Esau is so surprised by this. However, he had sold that birthright to Jacob. And maybe if the brothers had communicated with each other at some point, he might have remembered that, and they might have been able to make some peace earlier at this point than they do later. Who knows what would happen if we weren't constantly polluted by sin? There is a reversal order of heaven shown in the second blessing that Isaac gives to Esau when he says, "By your sword shall you live, and your brother shall you serve. When you rebel, you shall break off his yoke from your neck." So there is a possibility of freedom among the brothers, and both of them receiving a blessing, being able to move on in peace. So this reading ends with Jacob fleeing for his life from his brother, and he never does see his mother alive again. And then it shows Isaac in peace with Jacob as well. He is not upset or angry at Jacob when Jacob leaves. In chapter 28, verse 1, it says, Isaac summoned Jacob and blessed him, commanding him to take a wife from the house of Bethuel. And then he continues to show love to his son. May El Shaddai bless you and make you fruitful and multiply so you become an assembly of people. And may he grant you the blessing of Abraham to you and your seed as well, that you may take hold of the land of your sojournings, your wandering, which God granted to Abraham. So it doesn't show that Isaac is in contention with his son Jacob at all for what he has done. Probably that Isaac has accepted that this is the way that the Lord wanted things to go. And then our prophetic Haftarah reading was in Malachi, chapter 1 to 2:7. And this was as a warning against unworthy sacrifices from Israel. And ultimately, God opens it up to say that he is not pleased with that which Israel has half-heartedly given to him. Again, there is a big indication pointing to the patterns of Cain. And he says, but my name is honored in Malachi 1:11, but my name is honored by people of other nations from morning till night. All around the world they offer sweet incense and pure offerings in honor of my name. For my name is great among the nations, said the Lord of heaven's armies. And I'm going to jump down to Malachi 2:9. So I have made you despised and humiliated in the eyes of all the people, for you have not obeyed me, but have shown favoritism in the way you carry out my instructions. That first part that I read was to the people as a nation. But the second part, that verse 9 of Malachi 2, is specifically to the priests who were supposed to be taking responsibility for teaching the people how to be loving and inclusive. Israel was set apart as a nation to model and example the love of Christ to other nations, not to exclude them and tell them that we are better than you. And this is the lesson that Jacob and Esau should have learned from their parents and from Abraham and Sarah, that you are brothers, just as the nations are brothers. We all come from the same Adam, the same Noah, the same flesh and blood. And especially now in this new covenant, we are all covered by the blood of Christ and the word of our testimony. We all have common ground and something to relate in. And it is not until we can agree that a servant is no greater than their master, than their teacher, and do what Jesus did, be willing to serve each other instead of demanding that you be served, that we will really know the abundance of God. And it's what he's saying here, is other nations are willing to serve me and praise me and give me the first fruits, the best of what they have. And here you are perverting and polluting your gifts, your sacrifices to me, because you think that you are the favored or the entitled child. And Israel got that all wrong when they saw themselves as being set apart or chosen by God, thinking that that made them exclusive, that they would be up in heaven or even, I mean, in their eyes, it was that they would rule governmentally on earth rather than that they would be leading the way and showing people how to come closer to God and how he was different from the gods of all of their nations. And then the same thing is shown in Matthew 10. Our gospel reading was verses 21 through 38. And he talks about taking, students are not greater than their teacher, and slaves are not greater than their master. Students are to be like their teacher, and slaves are to be like their master. And since I, the master of the household, have been called the prince of demons, the members of my household will be called even worse names. Have you been called a demon yet? Because Jesus warns us that it can happen. We shouldn't be looking at the things that happened to him and think that our lives will necessarily be easier if we are actually compelled to follow and tell the truth. Yes, in love, but there seems to be an extreme nowadays of one or, either or, and instead it's both. God is law and he is love. So we don't just get to pick apart the things that we like and then say that we are favored or we are chosen. Instead, he says in verse 36 of Matthew 10, your enemies will be right in your own household. If you love your father or your mother more than me, you are not worthy of being mine. If you love your son or your daughter more than me, you are not worthy of being mine. If you refuse to take up your cross and follow me, you are not worthy. Verse 34 says, don't imagine that I came to bring peace to the earth. I came not to bring peace, but a sword. There is going to be separation, just as there was in day 2 and day 6 between man and beast. And you need to be willing to separate, to let God separate from you the unholy parts of you, to put you through those refining fires so that he can separate what is unholy from you and join you to him that is holy, join you closer to the submission, to you submitting to his Holy Spirit to sanctify you and bring you closer, not only to him, not only to the kingdom of God, but closer as an ambassador of Christ who shows the world how different El Shaddai, the Almighty God, is from the gods that they tend to make or follow, which is nowadays self, really. There's also verses about separation, needing to go through a type of separation or even division. Churches talk about, oh, don't divide. If you're doing anything that causes division, it's against God. That's not all true. But when God separates, as on day 2, he does not say it is good at separation. He says it is good at the coming together, as he did on day 3. On day 2, there is no good, but what needs to be separated is separated, and then he always is abundant to restore that which is separated to that which belongs together. I hope that makes some sense. So Matthew 3:12 also talks about separation, and Matthew 12:30. Jesus compels us to choose one way. There is no in between. Your war is within you, not with others.